So today we are going to go and take a look at 3 portraits. And what is the meaning of portraits? So this is the definition. Portraits is a representation or impression of someone or something in language or in film. And there's 3 women in the Bible that defied the odds, and they were full of faith, and they did extraordinary things. And these 3 women are Deborah, Esther, and Mary Magdalene. I know there's a lot of Marys, so just want to tell you which one. They loved God and they were obedient. And because they loved God and because of their obedience, they went down in history. And now we're all gathered here to talk about them. And today, whether you are a woman or a man, I want us to follow by their example. Live in freedom like Deborah. Take courage like Esther. And be faithful like Mary. So the first portrait is going to be Deborah. Deborah lived in freedom. Let me tell you, she lived in freedom. Her name actually means bee, like the little animal bee, which is totally fun because bees are really free. They go from one flower to another, and it's beautiful. Deborah was the 4th judge in Israel. She was a judge and a prophet, and also she did judicial function. She was the only woman judge. The only woman judge. She was also a wife of Lapidoth, and she lived around 1300 BC in the Old Testament, so 1300 before Jesus was born. So let's turn our Bibles to Judges chapter 4, starting at verse 4 to 10. Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, was a prophet who was judging Israel at the time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would go to her for judgment. One day, she sent Barak, son of Abinoam, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun at Mount Tabor, and I will call out Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, along with chariots and warriors, to Kishon River. There I will give you victory over him." Barak told her, "I will go, but only if you go with me." "Very well," she replied, "I will go with you, but you will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. At Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and the 10,000 warriors went up with him. Deborah also went with him. So at that time, Israel was oppressed by their enemies, the Canaanites. For 20 years, they were trying to fight them. And so God raised up Deborah to be the judge of Israel and help them defeat their enemies. She was spiritually and politically their leader. She had a special relationship with God. God communicated his will to her, and she would communicate God's will to the people. And she even wrote a song. The Bible shows a song that she wrote, a beautiful song, and how much she loves God. She has a special role in Scripture. And you know what's so interesting? That her role was not viewed as a challenge to the natural order of the Old Testament. We always think that, women and men in the Old Testament, but actually, it wasn't uncommon for women to be prophets and judge and also a wife and a mother. It wasn't contradicting each other. It's later that the culture changed in the New Testament. So if they were Jews. Now, of course, if they're pagans and they don't worship God, their role as a woman would be different. So Deborah was a prophet and a leader and also a wife. And she functioned as a government. So she would sit with the people, and if they had any disputes or argument or problems, they would come to her, and she would judge between them, just like Moses did. And she told Barak, "Okay, God is ready for us to go and fight and win against our enemies." And then Barak told her, and by the way, he's a military leader. Deborah was not a military leader. She was a judge. She was a prophet, but she was not a military leader. Women were not usually military leaders. So she told Barak, who's a military leader, hey, God is saying we need to go to war. Go ahead and go. And Barak is like, I ain't going. Only if you come with me, I will go. And she's like, hold on a second. You know that the victory is not ours because of me. It's because of God. And he's like, I'm not going until you go with me. This just shows how much they respected, loved, and honored her, and how much credibility she had. And so she's like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. But remember that you asked me to go. So she does go with them, and she wins the battle. By the way, she rebukes him. She's like, I will go, but she puts him back in his place. This is not right, but I'll go with you. And so she goes, and 10,000 men come at her command and assemble themselves to go to war. And they win. They defeat their enemies, and they enjoy 40 years of peace. Deborah lived in freedom, let me tell you. When God spoke to her to be a prophet, she took her place. When God spoke to her to be a judge, she took her place. You know, the people could have rejected her, right? I mean, I don't know, but they could have been like, we've never had a woman judge. I mean, we're open to it, but who are you? But they didn't reject her. They accepted her and trusted her and listened to her. And she did everything right. She was honorable. There were so many judges in the Old Testament that were evil. You guys know that? There were so many evil judges. But she was not evil. She was a good judge. The freedom that she lived was only to do whatever God asked her to do. She took her job seriously. And when God calls her, she went. See, when God calls you, he will confirm it with other people. See, freedom is not doing whatever you want, whenever you want. That's actually not freedom. It's actually the opposite. Freedom is doing whatever God tells you to do and not caring about what others think. It's stepping out of your comfort zone to do whatever God calls you without letting fear of failure, people pleasing, fear in general, trying to put down your insecurities, your shame, your doubt, your pain, your culture. Maybe your culture doesn't allow it, your past, to stop you. That is freedom. True freedom is stepping out because of who God is and not allowing, I'm not saying you are not going to feel bad or hurt or whatever, no, but not allowing it to stop you, not quitting because of your fear, not quitting because of your insecurity, not quitting when it gets hard. That is true freedom. It's saying, hey, I know you don't agree with me, but I'm going to obey God. I'm going to do what he asked me to do. And remember, whatever God asks you, he's going to confirm with scripture. He'll never ask you to do anything outside of his character, right? So if you hear something, you got to make sure it's with the scripture. It will be good. It will be honorable. It'll have order. That's how God works. So she was a good judge, and she judged. You know what's also interesting? Just a side note, it's not part of the theme. The commander of the army of the enemies, a woman killed him. So there was a lady called Jael, and she tricked him into coming to her tent, and then she killed him. And it's really interesting because at that time, I see a lot of strong, brave women. So today, I want to just remind us that God gifts women in spiritual leadership. God gifts women just like he does with men. And I think a lot of you already believe that. But I want to encourage you men here. I want to encourage every man here. Will you step out? Will you be advocates of your sisters, your friends, your mothers, your aunts, your daughters, to advocate for them so they can walk in freedom, just like Deborah did, and be able to fulfill whatever God is calling them to do? Because women can't do it without men. Deborah couldn't have done it without Barak. Deborah couldn't have done it without those men that respected and honored her. They could have rejected her, but they didn't. So will we have bravery today? Will we be obedient to what God asked us to do to walk into freedom? Will we be able to put away our insecurities? Deborah was a wife. She was a woman. Probably a mother. We don't know if she was, but I'm assuming she was married. Motherhood was such a big deal back then. We would all have like 10 kids by now. Like every woman here would be married with 10 kids. It was so important. She was a judge, a prophet, and also a warrior, which wasn't part of her job. But she stepped in. She's saying, okay, fine, I will be a warrior for my people. She didn't allow her environment and culture to cap her. She didn't allow the people to bully her. She didn't allow her insecurities to stop her. She didn't care what anybody thought or were saying. She walked into freedom with whatever God wanted. She didn't care if it was impossible or unacceptable, because it was unacceptable for women to be in the military back then. She lived in freedom. And what's interesting, she didn't care about being looked at as the hero. If you look at the text, she actually credits Barak for the song. But when you look at the song, it was written by a woman. It wasn't Barak. It was written by a woman. So you know what I mean? She put credit. She gave credit to other people. She was self-confident, assertive, modest, and selfless. She walked out of the shadows when a lot of people, men and women, wouldn't. She's a great spiritual leader as an example for all of us, men and women here. So will we walk in freedom? I'm asking you, will you today walk in freedom, just like Deborah, so that you can fulfill whatever God is asking you to do? Because it's not going to be easy, but will you do it? The second portrait is Esther. I think I don't know, ladies, who here loves Esther? I love Esther. She was a queen, you know? She was courageous. She took courage. Esther means star. It actually literally translates to the word star. And she lived in around 475 BC. So here's the story. At some point, the kingdom of Israel was conquered by Babylon, their enemies. And then they deported people to Babylon from Israel. They shipped them on ships. Can you believe it? They just shipped them on ships and put them there. And then later, Persia actually conquered Babylon. So now they became in charge. And so, there was a Persian king that allowed the Israelites to go back. He was like, guys, if you want to go back to your homeland, go for it. But a lot of people didn't. You know why? Because they were born in Persia. How many of you have you were born here, but your family are not from here? If your family or your mom came and said, hey, let's go back. You're like, back where? This is my, I don't know where back is. This is my home. Same thing. These people were like, no, we're staying. And one of them was Esther. So there is a guy named Mordecai, and he was Esther's cousin. And Esther was an orphan. She had no mom or dad, and he adopted her as a daughter. And one day, King Xerxes, who was a king of Persia, he was looking for a queen. So they went into the land to look for a beautiful queen, and they picked out from the entire region the most beautiful virgins, and they brought all of them to the palace. And Esther was one of them. And you know, Esther had favor wherever she went. She was beautiful. The Bible says she was beautiful and lovely. Lovely. But Mordecai told her, listen, don't tell anyone you're a Jew. No one should know you're a Jew. And she listened to him. She didn't tell anyone. And the king ended up loving her more than any other woman, and he picked her to be queen. He put that crown on her head and celebrated her. And then her cousin, Mordecai, became an official in the palace. But that's when trouble happens. Guys, whenever there's amazing things happening, right around the corner, the enemy's coming to try to steal your joy. But don't worry, God's always here. So there's this guy named Haman, and he is the second to the king. And there's a decree says that whenever he walks, everybody needs to bow. But if one thing you know about the Jews, they don't bow to nobody except God, right? So Mordecai would never bow. So he was so angry at Mordecai, and he was like, this guy doesn't want to bow to me. Who does he think he is? And then he figured out, oh, he's a Jew. So he went and deceived the king and made him sign a decree that says, on a specific day, on a specific time of the year, which is next year, all the Jews should be killed. And anybody can kill them and take their possessions. Can you believe that? Complete genocide. This guy didn't just hate Mordecai. He wanted to completely wipe out the entire Jewish race just because of the situation. And so that's when Mordecai found out that this decree was going. And then he was so sad, and he was weeping and crying and fasting and praying. See, the first thing, what do you do when the first thing you hear about something bad that is happening? What's the first thing that you do? Pray. That's great. You pray. That's what you need to do. He started praying and fasting with his people. And then he went and told Esther. He went and talked to Esther. He was asking her to plead and help them because she's the queen, right? Maybe she could talk some sense into her husband. So let's look at Esther 4, verse 11. And this is Esther talking back to Mordecai. Mordecai is like, hey, Esther, help us. Go and talk to the king so that we don't all die. And this is what Esther is saying back. All the king's officials and even the people in the province know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds his golden scepter. And the king has not called for me to come for 30 days. So she's basically saying, Mordecai, are you crazy? What are you asking me? You're asking me to go walk into the inner court of the king of Persia's? Are you crazy? First of all, he hasn't asked to see me in 30 days. Second of all, there is a rule and it's against the law for me to walk in there. And if I walk in there, the first thing that they're going to do is behead me unless he picks up his scepter and says stop. By the way, what if he doesn't see her and accidentally doesn't pick up the scepter? She'd be dead. But you know what she does? She says, okay, fine. I'm going to do it. Listen to what Mordecai says first. Let's pick up on verse 13. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at this time, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows, perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. She's talking back to him. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 nights and days. My maid and I will do the same thing. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die. And Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So Esther decides, okay, I will go. I guess if I die, I die. I'm going to go. And she doesn't just go. She asks all of her people and all of her maidens to fast, not eat for 3 days and not drink. Guys, have you ever gone without water for a day? Dude, it is painful. But they do it because this is business. They mean business here. They need to petition God. Their entire race is going to die. So she puts up her royal robe and she walks into the inner courts, not knowing what's going to happen. But the king does pull up his scepter and she lives. You know, you have to understand who Esther is. Esther was an orphan. Esther had no mom and dad. Esther was raised by her uncle. She was young. She was a woman in a culture, in a pagan culture that did not celebrate women. She was a concubine and then queen. She was also Jewish. She was taken from her house to the palace as basically a slave in hopes that maybe the king was going to choose her from all the other thousands of women. She had no freedom. She had to sleep with the king, not knowing how he looks like, who he is. We don't know anything about him. The Bible doesn't say anything about him really, of how he is with her. Not knowing if after she sleeps with him as a virgin, if he's going to pick her as the queen or not. How would that make you feel? A man she doesn't know, a man she doesn't love, a man she didn't pick, a man probably older. We don't know exactly how much, but he's probably older because the Bible does say that she was young. A man who's Persian, who's pagan, he doesn't have the same culture or rituals. Jews were very clean people. We don't know if Persians were or not. She has to undergo a 1-year treatment. 1 year of treatments of exfoliating and perfumes and bathes. And you know, you ladies were like, spa day, but imagine if you have it every day. It's going to get a little too much after a while. She had to be dressed by someone else, And she can't say no. She has no freedom. She's not allowed to eat the food she wants to eat. They will give her the food, which means that they probably gave her a lot of diet foods so that she can keep her physique for 1 year. She had no rights. She was basically a slave, but living in a palace. And guess what? If she wasn't picked as the queen, what would happen to her? Nobody would be able to marry her again. She would live alone in that palace and have no life. And she was also a Jew. You know what Jews were? Jews were like treated as second-hand citizens. Everybody knew that they came from Babylon from Israel to Babylon and then Persia as slaves. They did not have the same rights as the Persians. Everything was against her at that time. But Esther picked to be queen, and the king loved her and favored her. But that doesn't mean she's saved, guys. As you know, king is king. Queen is just queen by name. He could replace her at any moment, like he did with his old queen. Go read the entire chapter. He did that with the other one. She was probably afraid, thinking, what if he found out I'm a Jew? Is he going to reject me? She felt insecure. She's been through a lot. She's an orphan. But she still walked into that gate knowing, you know what? If I die, I die. I die for my people. I'm going to do it and die trying. And the king does hold his scepter, and he does saves her life. And not only that, look how God is so good. He protects her and favors her. And I want you to know that walking into that room probably was the scariest moment of her life. But God was with her. Nothing was going to happen to her. And not only does he save her life, he asks her, come on, Esther, what would you like? Take as much as half of my kingdom. That's how much he loved her. She probably felt like she had a title, but didn't really have a lot of say. But she was wise, smart, selfless, humble, and courageous. I have a question. Are you guys willing to die for the people you love? So if something happens today and there's a rule that's casted in California or the United States that says you're not allowed to be Christian, what would you do? And we needed one spokesperson. Would you say, I'm going? Will you go and speak on our behalf? Are you willing to put your life down on the line for the rest of us? For your friends, for your family, for your church? Are you willing to do that like Esther did? Or is that too much? But let me tell you what she did. She was wise. The first thing she did was she said, let's fast and pray. She didn't do it alone, guys. Esther didn't walk into that door alone. She did it with everybody else because they were all praying and fasting with her. That's wisdom. She trusted God. She petitioned God first before she does anything in the physical. In the supernatural, she petitioned God first. She was very smart. She didn't tell the king right away what she wanted. You guys, when she walked into that gate, she didn't say, I'm walking in because you put a decree that all the Jews should be killed. Please spare me. She didn't do that. She walked in and she said, I'm inviting you to a banquet. The king comes to the banquet. Then she says, I'm inviting you to another banquet. The king's come back to another banquet. And then later, she tells him. She asked him gradually. She was smart. She knew what she was doing. She was selfless. She said, if I perish, I will perish. She cared about other people. She just didn't think about herself. You know, she could have been like, well, I'm the queen. No one's going to touch me. No one's going to kill me. No one's going to find out. Let all the Jews die. I'll survive. She didn't do that. She thought about other people. That is what a true queen does. That is what a true person who follows Jesus and God does. They think about other people. It's not just about themselves. She was humble. When she petitioned the king, she didn't go, I'm your queen. You love me, don't you? Like Delilah does, with Samson. She went in very humbly and says, if it pleases you, could I make a request? She was very humble. And she was courageous. She went into that inner court knowing that she could have died. See, if you think today that you don't have influence, I'm here to tell you that's not true. You might have maybe an empty title. Maybe you're not the boss. Maybe you're not the top leader, but you're wrong. You have influence. You have influence everywhere you go. You have influence to the people around you. You just have to learn how to play your cards right. You have to be like Esther, wise. When making decisions, make sure that you ask God first. You have to be smart. You need to make sure to learn how to request things from other people. When and how and where. You need to be selfless. You need to care about others around you. People catch up when you don't care about them. They can feel it. And if you have influence, you need to care about others. You need to be humble. People don't get anywhere in life if they're arrogant and stuck up. You need to be humble and honor God, and God will honor you back because you are humble. You need to be courageous. Face your fears. Walk out of your comfort zone. If God asks you to do something, do it. Are you willing to die for God? Are you willing to die for God? Are you willing to die for the gospel? You have to answer that question at some point. You got to be sold out because the world is going to come and it's going to tell you all kinds of things. And you need in your heart to settle this question, am I willing to die for God? And if the answer is no, it's okay. At least you're honest. Then we can start somewhere, right? You can grow to the point where you're like, I am willing. Because nobody's willing right away. It takes time. But at some point, will you love Jesus enough to say, God, I'm yours? I will die for you. I will die for the sake of the gospel. I will die for the sake of others. Esther showed wisdom and patience in a terrible situation when she was married to a difficult husband. And if any of you are married to a difficult husband, Esther's got you. Play your cards right. Be wise, smart, faithful, humble, selfless. Take courage like Esther. She saves her entire people. The entire Jewish race was saved because of one woman who was courageous. And not only that, look how good God is. He not only saves the Jewish people, but guess what he did? He eliminated everybody that hated the Jews got killed instead of the Jews. That's how good he is. Let's look at the third portrait. It's Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene in the New Testament. Jesus' student. Mary was faithful. Mary actually means loved by Yahweh, loved by God. That's her name, Mary. And she's from the town of Magdala, and she was living around 30 AD. She lived around Jesus' time. She was the first person to see Jesus when he resurrected. She had a very beautiful, special bond with Jesus. We actually don't know if she was married or had kids, but from the Bible, it shows like she didn't. She was with Jesus all the time. There's no mention of her husband or kids or anything. So Mary had 7 demons. She was possessed with 7 demons. Has any of you met anybody who's possessed before? Possessed, not oppressed. Inside of them, there is a demon. So it is not a fun thing to watch. The person hurts themselves. The person does things that they can't control. She's a woman. Imagine what things those demons made her do. They probably made her cut herself, sleep with people, get into fights, throw herself on the floor, expose herself. This is the type of stuff Mary went through. But once Jesus saw her and delivered her from these 7 demons, she was completely delivered, transformed, and she stayed with him the entire time. She never left his side. She was completely dedicated. And this is the interesting part. Guess what? In Jesus' time, it wasn't like the Old Testament. In Jesus' time, the Jewish culture did not like or allow women to be students or disciples. But Jesus didn't care. He allowed a lot of women to be around. He taught them just like he did with the other disciples. And Mary was one of them. So let's look at Luke chapter 8, starting from verse 1. Soon after Jesus began a tour of nearby town and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God, he took his 12 disciples with him, along with some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Among them were Mary Magdalene, from whom he casted out 7 demons, Joanna, wife of Chuza, Herod's business manager, Susanna, and many others who were contributing from their own resources to support Jesus' disciples. So let's look at Mary. Let's look at Mary. Mary lived in a time and culture where women were not valued. If you were not married or if you didn't have children, you literally were alone. Jesus frees her, but remember, she still has a past. The entire village remembers when she was possessed. She still had shame. And I don't think she had any family because there's no mention of family. And also, if she did have family, it's more than likely they would have abandoned and disowned her because of her situation. But Mary clings to Jesus. She stays with him all the way until his crucifixion. She sees him after and stays with him all the way till he descends in heaven. She was so close to Jesus. You know, it's so easy for us to ask God to deliver us and to ask him for all kinds of prayer. And once he gives it to us, we go back to our normal life, doing whatever else we're doing. But Mary, after she was freed, she had a choice to go back and do whatever she wanted, but she didn't. She clinged to Jesus and said, "You freed me. I want to be with you all the time. I love you. I want to be with you all the time." And she did. Her love to him was so intense. She was committed to him 100%. She was brave. Even though women could not be students, she didn't care. She hung around. You know, I would think the disciples might have been like, why is this lady hanging around all the time? But she didn't care. She's like, I'm going to be with you. A lot of women back then did not know how to write or read. They didn't have the same value, right? But she continued to go and stay with Jesus, regardless of how the other disciples felt of her. How many times do you guys quit as soon as somebody else around you says you don't belong here? Oh, they don't like me. I'm just going to leave. They don't like me at this job. I'm going to quit. I'm not really feeling it here at this church. I'm going to leave. Go find another one. You go into a place, I don't know, these people are not cool. How many times do you just want to quit the moment that there is any type of pushback? But this is a thing. If God is calling you, you got to stick it through. And Jesus allowed her to be there. He wanted her there, and that was enough for her. She did not need the people's approval. She did not need the other rabbis' approval. She did not need the disciples' approval. She certainly didn't need Peter's approval. Can I tell you something? As Christians, you will be going through things that'll make you uncomfortable. It will challenge you, but you need to not stop. If you want to be close to Jesus, you're going to have to be obedient. And you have to do what he's asking, even if you won't and don't understand, and even if people don't understand. You know, I remember before I was a pastor, we were in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was part of this very big church. And before a long time before, I wasn't married, and I remember I was serving in a high capacity, as a high capacity leader. And I would go there in the morning and come back in the evening. I'd wake up early and sleep late for church. And my friends, a lot of people around me would be like, why are you doing that? Oh, I can't hang out on Saturday night. Why? You're young, you know, don't you want to go out and do stuff? And I'm like, no, I got to be in church. And I was serving and doing, and they didn't understand why I was doing that. But I knew God was calling me to do these things. Maybe people didn't understand. I literally served in every area in the entire church, except where the babies are. That's the only area I did not serve in. Got to be honest. You know, but I served everywhere, not knowing at the end I was going to be here today with you guys and plant a church. I didn't know that, but God did, and I was obedient. And I knew that I was doing it to expand his kingdom. It didn't matter. And this is the thing, when you're a part of like a bigger church, you don't get a lot of thank yous, guys. There's a lot of things you do and nobody knows you're doing what you're doing. But it didn't matter. I didn't need the thank yous because I was doing it for God. And he saw what I was doing, so it didn't really matter, you know? I was giving freely because God gave me freely. She didn't quit. Mary didn't quit. She didn't allow her past and shame to stop her. She was going to stay with Jesus no matter what. She was faithful. Did you know, this is really interesting. Did you know back then in Jesus' time, it was very common for women to support rabbis, for women to support the ministries of men? And Mary, along with other women, Luke says, in the book of Luke, that Mary, along with Suzanne and other people, supported Jesus' ministry. She's financially supported Jesus' ministry. She supported Jesus and the disciples, the ones that might not have liked her in the beginning, along with other people. Everything that he asked her to do, she did it, and she never asked for anything in return. She loved Jesus. She loved Jesus. She was there at the garden, watching him weep. Without being asked, she was there. And you can find that verse in John, just so you guys know. She was not afraid what people thought. Peter ran away because they were like, he was with Jesus. Mary was like, I don't care. I'll die with him. She literally was there all the way. All the disciples left except John. She was there at the crucifixion. She watched Jesus die. Yes, it got her, it probably made her very hurt. She experienced grief and pain. She didn't understand. How could he die on the cross if he was the Messiah? Is he the Messiah? Maybe he's not. What's going on? I don't know. But she was there. She never left his side. She was there until his spirit came out of his body. That was Mary. And then she went to the tomb. She was not afraid of anybody judging her. And as the worship team come up, she was also honorable. She went to the tomb with the perfumes and the incense. Back then, when the people die, you go and anoint their body as a way of honor. This is the Jewish ritual. And she walked to the tomb. Guys, there's a huge rock on the door. How in the world is Mary is going to open that stone, roll that stone away? She walked there not knowing, she had all these items in her hand, going to the tomb, not knowing, how am I going to get inside? But she was going to make it happen. Have you ever been there where like, I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to go and God's going to figure out a way. That's what Mary did. She honored Jesus so much that she's like, I'm anointing my Lord's body. And she was obedient. When the angel appeared and told her, he's risen, he's no longer here. Go tell the other disciples and grab them. She went and told them, and no one believed her, not even one. But she didn't give up. She came back to the tomb all alone, but she did. And guess who was there? How many times does God tell you to do something and you tell others and they don't believe you, so you quit? Why do you need other people to believe what God has asked you to do, what God has promised you to do? You know, there is this time where I remember I was in Austin, Texas, and we were driving to our new home. And the lady told me because of the traffic, I was going to get there late. Listen to the story. This is an amazing story that happened to me, and I'll never forget it. We're driving, and I call her and say, we're going to be late. And she's like, I'm sorry, I only get paid by the hour. I'm leaving. And it was a Friday night, and she says that Saturday and Sunday, the entire office is closed, so I can only get into my house on a Monday. We're pulling an entire trailer, and I have a dog. Where are we going to go? She's like, you can stay at a hotel. And I'm like, no, I paid for rent for those 2 days. She's like, I'm sorry. I'm going to go. I got coffee with my friend. She hangs up. And I remember Pastor Logan is driving and he's like, okay, should we call a friend? We had some friends. So they said we can stay at their office. They can put some mattresses for us and we can stay at their office. And that's the moment that I said, no, I'm not starting this new move like that. This is my place. This is my house. And I am going to sleep in it tonight. And I know it sounds very crazy. And I'm not saying it's always going to happen that way. But I remember I felt God speak to me and says, is it yours? Do you want it? Are you going to press in? And I remember 2-3 hours of driving. And all I can do is worship and pray and worship and pray and pray and pray that God would do something miraculous. And the guy that had an office, he's also a pastor. And he says, so what's your plan? And I said, my plan is to sleep in my house tonight. And he said, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm just going to sleep in my house tonight. He thought I was crazy. When Mary went to the disciples and said, Jesus is risen, they thought she was crazy. But she didn't care. She still went to the tomb. She's like, I'm going to go even if I'm alone. I'm going to see Jesus. And I kid you not, after 2 hours of praying, that phone rings. And I remember that lady, I don't know what is up with her, but I can tell you her voice changed. The way she spoke to me has changed. I do not know what happened. But she says, oh, I'm just calling you. I'm at the cafe around the corner. Take your time. I'm just having coffee with my friend. Let me know when you're here. No rush. And I'm like, this lady is like completely transformed. This is not the same lady who was really rude to me. And we get there and she opens the door and she is petting my dog. She's like, oh, she's so cute. She's not in a hurry. And I even say, do you want me to pay you? Like, I can pay you, And she's like, don't worry about it. She wasn't even getting paid. And she opened our house for us. And we slept there that night. Because even if the other pastor thinks I'm crazy, because honestly, it does sound crazy. It sounds like one of those, like, girl, it's not a big deal. Just sleep in the thing for 2 days, But I heard God say, this is the enemy attacking you. He wants to ruin your move and discourage you because this is the first thing you're going to experience in that city when you're really excited. Don't allow it. And I didn't. So just like Mary, she walked to the tomb and guess who was there? It was Jesus. Jesus appeared to her and she got to see him. The first person who saw him. You know what's fascinating? She got to share the good news. She was the first person to see the angel. She was the first person to share the good news of his resurrection. She was the first person to see Jesus. The disciples didn't see Jesus first. Peter didn't see Jesus first. James and John didn't see Jesus first. Mary, his mother, didn't see Jesus first. Jesus chose to appear to Mary Magdalene before anybody else. If I'm his mom, I'd be like, what's up with that? But that just shows you he is honoring her because she's so faithful. She became the first witness. And by the way, in Jewish culture, as a woman, you cannot be a legal witness. And Jesus, when he appeared to her, he changed that forever. He changed the culture. He changed the legal system. A woman was now a legal witness. And not just any woman, a woman who had the past, who was possessed. She goes down in history in the Bible as one of the closest student and disciple of Jesus. Mary was faithful with everything she had. Are you doing everything that God is asking you to do? Are you believing when he's asking you to pray? Are you believing in the miracles? Are you believing? I sounded like crazy when I don't know what Pastor Logan thought of me when I was like, I'm not doing this, But I'm like, could you partner? And we both were praying. I'm like, I need you to stand with me. And I've seen in my life, I have seen God do amazing, crazy things because of crazy faith. Now, I'm going to be honest, not everything has come to pass. But the ones that I heard from him did come to pass. Do you support Jesus' ministry? Do you support Jesus' ministry? In your time, in your gifts, in your finances? Are you willing to give it all for God? Like Mary did. Are you spending time with Him? Are you praying? Are you reading? Are you just spending time with Him? He wants to be with you, like Mary did. Will you suffer for Him? Will you stick it to the end? Will you humble yourself and do whatever He's asking? No matter what happens in your life, did you make a decision you'll never give up on Him, ever? Whether He answers your prayer or if He doesn't answer your prayer, you are committed forever. Here at Ignite LA, we want to be people that live in freedom. We want to be people that take courage. We want to be people that are faithful. Like Deborah, Esther, and Mary, whether we're men and women, we can learn from these women who went before us. So today, as we worship right now with one another, can we please open our hearts and allow God to transform us so we can live in freedom? In freedom for whatever God wants us to do. Let's take courage and be able to step out of our comfort zone, and let's be faithful with our resources, time, and gifts like these people. So let's worship together.